So we have the whistleblower from Cambridge Analytica, which is the data firm that helped elect Donald Trump in 2016, and data rights activist Brittany Kaiser. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian, for having me.
So first off, could you briefly explain what Cambridge Analytica did and your involvement?
Of course. So, Cambridge Analytica was a startup big data company that went about purchasing and licensing the personally identifiable information and connecting data sets of people all around the world in order to make predictions about their behavior and then run influence campaigns to change their actions, not just in elections, also for commercial advertising and actually in the beginning for military purposes. So what the company was doing was advising governments, militaries, political parties, and companies around the world on how they could make data-driven strategies to either obtain more customers, more supporters, more loyal citizens, whatever it happened to be. And unfortunately, because they were operating in a gray space, and I would say a largely unregulated data industry that is still true today, it meant that if you didn't have moral or ethical guidelines that you were adhering to, then you could do, well, nearly anything technically under the law, although they still managed to cut corners legally as well, which is why I eventually came out as a whistleblower to change that and make sure we actually have a regulated landscape to protect people.
What was your involvement like walk me through a little bit about when you joined the company?
Yeah, so when I joined the company, I was a PhD student in my 10th year of human rights law school and finishing up my project on preventive diplomacy, which what that means is how do you use executive power in government, so ambassadors, heads of state, heads of United Nations departments, in order to prevent atrocities, prevent war from happening. And it turned out my entire doctoral thesis ended up being about data science. So I was trying to figure out how I could learn enough about data science outside of my law school where they couldn't teach it to me. And I joined Cambridge Analytica as a director of business development, running around the world, meeting people that either wanted to be president or prime minister or wanted to stay there because they had already been elected, meeting with big companies, governments, militaries that wanted to use data-driven strategies. And so I worked with a team of expert data scientists to figure out what you could use data for, how to run data science programs, and of course, their, I suppose, secret sauce, which was behavioral influence. How do you predict people's behavior in a way that you could actually intervene and affect the actions that they take?
Before going to Cambridge Analytica, you worked with human rights organizations, with Amnesty International, with the Obama campaign. Mm-hmm. How do you go from that to the data firm aligned with Steve Bannon that worked with Ted Cruz and ultimately helped elect Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I joined the company in order to learn how to do better campaigning for the organizations that I was aligned with. In fact, my CEO would laugh all the time and say, hey, help me close a contract in this country, and then you can create your own Cambridge Analytica and win all of the campaigns that you want to win for the rest of your life, which I suppose, could make me sound naive or, eternally optimistic, which is the way that I usually see the world. And so being at a company where eventually a lot of the clientele was not the type of people that I would ever vote for or support or be involved with was, debilitating to my mental health, I would say. And, something that drove me eventually to become a whistleblower because while hoping that most people would use technology in a responsible way, I saw that that was incredibly untrue, especially in a landscape where, as I said, you were technically allowed to do almost anything that you wanted. And unfortunately, I saw that happen in such an abusive manner that I had to decide to risk everything in order to try to stop that from happening again.
And it's obviously like being around these people and being immersed in that world that has to have some impact on you, right? So like, did your political affiliation change while you're there? Like, what is your political affiliation now? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm now quite a staunch independent because unfortunately, working as a political consultant, you see a lot of the ways that politics operates, not just in the United States, but around the world, and how corrupt that is. So, really interested in working outside of the party system on issues that I believe in, as opposed to specifically aligning with a set of values that are pushed on to people. So, I was a staunch Democrat for most of my life. And this past election, I actually voted for independents, libertarians, Democrats, and even my first Republicans, who are mostly blockchain enthusiasts that I want to see in Congress because I care about the emerging technology and privacy and data protection.
So Cambridge Analytica had marketed itself as having 5,000 data points on every American, but in reality, you weren't focused on 300 million Americans. You were focused on what you called the persuadables. So can you explain what those are and how many you targeted?
Absolutely. So the concept of persuadables are people who more easily will change a decision that they were predicted to make. So, you could call those swing voters. In commercial advertising, they're called switchers. And you can tell through data science, especially through behavioral data sets, of how often people click on things, how many times they need to see an advertisement in order to give their email or opt in to take an action, if they are the type of person that can be persuaded to change their mind. And so if you own enough data about people, and if you have enough money to run these types of wide scale experiments, it is really possible for you to tell to a high degree of accuracy who these people are. And so it depends what issue or what candidate or what product you happen to be selling or advocating for. But usually that's around 30% of the population, right in the middle, not people who are stuck on a certain candidate or party or not brand loyalists, so to say. And those individuals are the people that are going to receive, unfortunately, the bombardment of both political and commercial advertising, because those are the people where all of their behaviors thus far have shown that if you talk to them often enough and you spend enough time and money on them, that they will consider your opinion or your product or whatever it happens to be.
And in 2016, that was basically people in Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, and Pennsylvania. I think I think that you targeted most heavily.
Well, actually, one of the interesting things about the Trump campaign was that the Trump campaign considered 16 different states swing states, where Hillary Clinton's campaign only concentrated on 9. That's because through advanced data science, it was shown that if you targeted a specific small number of people in different precincts, that there were 16 different states that were possible to turn red instead of blue. And that was down to a very specific number. As you remember, in 2016, there were some states that were won by 11,000 votes.
Right.
And that was something that was practiced, I suppose, on Ted Cruz in the primaries, and then was proven on Trump's campaign in the general.
So let's move ahead to 2020. Was the fact that Cambridge Analytica no longer exists now one of the reasons why Trump's 2020 campaign was unable to replicate his 2016 win?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, instead of one Cambridge Analytica, there's now hundreds of Cambridge Analyticas. A lot of companies, not just in the United States, but around the world, saw that that type of advanced predictive analytics was incredibly useful. And also a lot of the people that ran Trump 2016 were still running Trump 2020. The same Cambridge Analytica team of Matt Oskowski and crew that originally were working for Cambridge, now we're just working directly for the Trump campaign or through Brad Parscale's company or their own political consultancy. So it really wasn't that. In my opinion, it was that it had been proven time and time and again that the president had committed, I would say, nearly ceaseless violations on the American people. And therefore, it wasn't just a problem that he had broken laws and social norms in order to win in 2016, but the continual disinformation campaigns levied on both the American people and the world at large, as well as complete lack of interest in morals, ethics, or truth and reality is what eventually eroded his ability to continue to serve as president of the United States.
So you had mentioned that there's dozens of other companies that sprouted up in the wake of Cambridge Analytica. Are those companies limited because they're not able to they basically don't have free reign to scrape without permission the data points for these for people on Facebook and then thousands of their friends basically? Did that limit them or is it just, or are they not really, is that just one small obstacle and they can still, they still have carte blanche? It's still the Wild West of the internet basically.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's still pretty much the Wild West in the United States. At least in Europe, they've passed the General Data Protection Regulation. So GDPR has meant that it's more difficult to do those types of kind of underhanded or dirty tactics in Europe. But in the United States, we still have no federal data protection or privacy legislation. So most of what Cambridge Analytica did, new companies can still do that exact same thing. Unfortunately, the only thing that they can't do is have direct API access to everyone's personal data in Facebook. But Facebook's tools are sophisticated enough that you can use their targeting system without taking the raw data, I would say the individual data points, out of Facebook and modeling them yourself. Instead, you can use their tools to target very specific groups for specific purposes. And what I think is really important to note is that there are some advancements that have made certain things more difficult. For instance, in 2016 was the first time where you really saw national campaigns of disinformation and fake news and voter suppression campaigns that were data-driven. So we do have laws against slander and libel. We have laws against incitement of violence and racial hatred. We have laws against voter suppression. But unfortunately, in 2016, none of those laws were enforced on social media platforms. Now, in 2020, we've made some small steps, at least kind of the data protection and privacy advocacy community. I wouldn't say it's because the platforms decided to grow a moral backbone, but they've been forced in order to have some new steps, such as flagging inappropriate content, which a lot of people that don't understand the right to free speech call censorship, but the right to free speech is not an unchecked right. Right. My right to free speech ends where your human rights begin. And so therefore, exactly. There's a difference between censorship and enforcement of the law, actually.
Yeah. And that applies to a lot of different subjects also, by the way. Even the late Justice Scalia even said about the Second Amendment that the rights in the Second Amendment are not unlimited. So I think people confuse are certain freedoms with having unlimited freedoms.
Correct.
Okay, so quick question. Is it fair to say that the campaigns that Cambridge Analytica used against Hillary Clinton were smear campaigns or disinformation campaigns?
Absolutely. Not everything, not all of it, but I would say I have so much evidence of different campaigns that not are just smear campaigns, because smear campaigns could be considered legal, but are blatant slander, libel, and voter suppression tactics. So the evidence I have alone just from me is enough for me to say that Donald Trump used illegal tactics in order to be elected in 2016 and shouldn't have been president in the first place.
With our weak enforcement mechanism right now, I mean, because we're seeing, it's not just if you thought Fox News was bad, well, now we have OAN, now we have Newsmax, so it doesn't seem like it's getting better. It doesn't seem like it's being enforced better. So what's to stop right-wing media from seeing that a smear campaign worked in 2016 and just pumping out literal fake news to manipulate people in 2022, 2024, 2026? How do you police this kind of thing? How do you come back to a place where reality is even accepted online?
Right.
Just a simple. That's an easy question.
I would say it's kind of on two different levels. One is obviously when we're thinking about Section 230 and how publishers are actually regulated. We need to have stronger enforcement on that, number one, because there are now TV news networks that are willing to put out blatant fake news and disinformation that upon even the weakest of fact checking is proven false. So that actually needs to be legislated against. And I think what is probably going to help is to have criminal liability attached to that, as opposed to just civil liability and fines. That's something that I couldn't be a stronger supporter of, not just in terms of fake news and disinformation by publishers, but also in terms of data protection violations. Senator Elizabeth Warren introduced a bill last April called the Corporate Executive Accountability Act, which is that if you are to violate through negligence data protection laws, which is in a lot of the same body of work as fake news and disinformation, that the executives of that company would be criminally liable. So I think if the owners or heads of these companies thought that they could serve jail time for these types of violations, then we would see a lot less of it. And so I'm a big fan of that, number one, but also our FEC needs more teeth. We need a new FEC commissioner that's going to go in there and actually make our Federal Election Commission laws legally enforceable. Because right now they're sitting with a pile of complaints all the way back to 2014, 2015, 2016, and nothing has been done about it. They haven't been properly investigated, let alone any charges being levied.
So I do want to real quick move over to the Russian hack that we've been hearing about. Can you speak to the idea that if we know about this hack, that it's worse than we could imagine, and what does that entail basically?
What does that entail? All of us having a come to Jesus moment about the fact that we need actual technologists running our government. Number one. It also entails the reality that we're faced with, that we probably need to fully rebuild our government's back-end technology infrastructure. I think the GSA is going to have a huge problem on their hands for the next couple of years. It's going to create a need for a much bigger cyber security task force within the government, kind of like we had the president fire everyone that could have possibly helped prevent the widespread nature of the pandemic. He did the same thing on the cybersecurity side. The president doesn't even use a computer. So that shouldn't be surprising that he didn't care or place any importance on cybersecurity. So I'm really excited.
I just figured he could just put Jared Kushner in there and he'll figure everything out, like
right?
he usually does.
This is the problem that we're faced with. We need actual experts working in our government. And I am so excited that we have, around a month left until we can actually put professionals back into running our country.
Yeah. Well, knowing what you know about data, how could the Russians use the information that they have access to now, from the American people against us?
In any way that they'd like to, which is probably the biggest disaster. I mean, the one of the biggest things that I continually have to say over the past many years is that, nobody needed to secretly give the Russians access to data. The personal data of everyone in America is easily purchasable or even obtainable on the dark web for free by anybody in the world, whether it be a foreign government, a hacker group, or just someone that's doing it for fun, because we have no laws or widespread enterprise level technology that is protecting people in America. Legislative, regulatory, and technology all are completely dysfunctional in this country. And so we really need to spend a massive amount of time and investment, which this Russian hack has now guaranteed, at least we will have, hopefully, over the coming years, to make sure that we are less vulnerable. But, the entire Mueller investigation was centered around whether or not the Trump campaign or Cambridge Analytica was working with Russia, which, I still believe is possible for the Trump campaign. I can't say things about people that I don't know or meetings I wasn't at. But I do know for a fact that anyone in Russia could have already obtained enough data in order to do significant damage at any time to the American populace. And even with just a couple $100,000, we're able to sow seeds of disinformation in the 2016 election that was shown to over 157 million Americans with a couple $100,000. That's now that they have access to all of our data, including our state secrets, including our nuclear programs, we need to really take technology and cybersecurity seriously, or the entire safety or future of our country is at risk.
And do we have anybody in government right now championing this, or in Congress more specifically?
I would say in Congress, the biggest champion would be Senator Mark Warner, who I'm a huge fan of. He does amazing work. The legislation that he puts forward is incredibly technical and therefore will be enforceable once we get it through. Unfortunately, we haven't had that much movement over the past few years on federal data legislation. But I do believe that after we have new people in Congress in January, that we're going to get a lot further. The development has really been happening in the states like Wyoming, California. There's a lot of moves happening in New York. I'm involved in all of those initiatives, and I have a lot of hope. I especially hope that we'll see someone like Andrew Yang appointed as CTO of America, who can really start to take people's data rights seriously and would be one of the right people to come in with a background in technology, a real understanding of what needs to be done, and help build back up the expertise that we should have had over the past 4 years.
So that's a good segue into the Own Your Data Foundation. So can you speak on that?
Absolutely. So my Own Your Data Foundation is our 501c3 charity where we believe in the democratization of digital literacy education. And what I mean by that is we believe every single person around the world should have access to the knowledge of not just how to protect themselves online, but how to lead a successful digital life, especially since in 2020, we've all been thrown accidentally into having to lead our entire lives on our devices when nobody was ready for that. I mean, we're producing exponentially more data every single day, and most people don't even know basic privacy protocols. Right. So what we do is we teach, especially this year, parents and teachers and kids how to protect themselves online, but we're also doing government training, professional training, high school, college, even early childhood, because now a lot of tiny children are being given their own device a lot more early than they ever should be by their parents out of need. And that necessity has really pushed forward the requirement for more people to have this digital literacy education. So trying to get it into as many schools around the world as possible. We're partnered with the World Economic Forum, OECD, UNICEF. We teach an IEEE global standard that is already in tens of countries around the world. We're trying to make sure that as many Americans, especially people in vulnerable populations, are getting access to this. We're starting teaching, for instance, in indigenous schools on reservations and in schools that can't really afford to buy these types of programs and implement them at a school-wide level. So I think this is as important for government officials as it is for kids. And unfortunately, kids probably already know more about how technology works than a lot of government officials. And that's where we're at right now.
Got it. Yeah. All right. Well, Brittany, happy holidays. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. And if anyone listening to this wants to get more involved in any of these initiatives, please reach out to me at info@ownyourdata.foundation. My website is ownyourdata.foundation, and you can follow me on social media at ownyourdata or at ownyourdata now, depending on which platform you prefer to use. So thank you guys for caring about these issues. And thank you again, Brian, for having me.